Hey there, this is Franklin, and you're listening to Who Asked Us? Deep thoughts, lighthearted conversations. Here, you'll listen along as we discuss our way through the Bible with a growing, rotating panel of guests, none of which claim to be experts on any of this. We hope you get just as much out of these conversations as we did having them. Thanks for listening. He tells all of our students, if you don't know somebody's middle name, you don't actually care about them. So
Exactly.
Yes.
Cool. So, I mean, what's nice about a rolling start is we can kind of just dive right in. Everyone cool with what we're talking about today?
Yeah.
Yeah, no question. So we're basically doing like an overview, just like, I mean, as silly as it sounds, we're just talking about Genesis, like kind of chapters 1 to 11. Just kind of like talking about what are your viewpoints on that kind of a thing? What are your reactions when thinking to that as a whole? Any questions that pop in? Any things that you feel like are controversial, non-controversial? What kind of just pops in your head?
Do you mind if
James,
I start?
You can't contain your excitement. I can see the smiles.
I know.
spilling out of
Sorry.
your face.
I'm so excited to be talking about this, and so thank you for inviting me on. So I read chapters 1 through 11 in preparation for this. It's the first time I read it in probably over 10 years. And the first thing that stuck out to me is the Bible goes into great detail about lineage, which, it does many times, but talks a lot about the lineage, obviously from Adam and Eve, and then to Noah, and then from Noah, I can't remember exactly where chapter 11 ends, but it was just surprising to me. Like, I forgot that Noah was that early in the Bible. Like, I know that that's like a silly kind of first reaction, but I remember, that Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and then all of a sudden you're like, it shares the lineage to Noah, and then you start hearing about the Great Flood. So it was very nice to read that for the first time in years. And so I have a lot more thoughts about it, and I don't know if you guys want to get into deeper discussions about the creation story and our takes on it, how literal we think it is versus, how much of a story or a story it is and things like that. So I don't know if anybody wants to pick it up from there.
So what do you mean about being so surprised that Noah was so early? Just literally like in the whole grand scheme of the books?
Yeah, pretty much. And also another thing is everybody's talking about how old everybody is. 500 years old, 900 years old. It's very interesting. And I know I've heard interpretations where people think that that's literal, like that's how long people used to live. But I've also heard interpretations like it could be that they were counting, seasons or months instead of years, right? And things like that. So I tend to think of it more like that, where it's they weren't being literal in the terms of that's how many years they lived. I also I don't take the creation story literally. I more on the side that God created the universe, and there's a great play that I'm sure I imagine most of us are familiar with, Inherit the Wind. I remember reading this play when I was in school about the Scopes trial where teaching evolution in, I think it was it Tennessee? I forget which state it was. And they go into this whole explanation about how the Bible and evolution are not necessarily at odds with each other. But if you look at the story of Genesis as a story where it's not exactly being literal, then they could work very well, like hand in hand. So I'm happy to talk more about that. I don't want to capitalize on the opening. So anybody else want to?
First, you have to dive into what is this play everybody's seen?
I've never seen it. Never heard of it.
I've never seen it.
So nobody has heard of Inherit the Wind?
No, is this like?
No.
Oh, I thought you were joking. Like everybody.
No. Sorry, I'm sorry. It was a popular play. I think I looked into it just before this, just to make sure I kind of knew. I think it was written or premiered or whatever in 1955, and it was written about the 1925 Scopes monkey trial, which was about the teacher, I think in Tennessee, but I could be wrong about the state, that was teaching evolution. I'm gonna look this up before I talk too much about it. But long story short, it was like a fictionalized telling of that trial, and talking about how a teacher was being sued by the by the state for teaching evolution in the class, and the ACLU defended this teacher in this case, and the whole play ultimately comes to the culmination of the fact that teaching evolution doesn't have to be at odds with the creation story. And so I think that it was very refreshing to read the creation story for the first time in a long time. And, like Inherit the Wind was the first thing that came up. I read that play, when I was in high school or something for an assignment. So I'm going to look into that. But why don't you guys talk about your interpretations of it before I capitalize on this too much?
Yeah, I'll happen. So, I think one of the things that's great is that it's okay for us to have different points of view and different vantage points. So I know you were saying that you don't necessarily take it literally. I do take Genesis literally, which at times is a challenge because there's things in there you read and you're like, Methuselah 900, how many years? Like, what's that about? But you have to remember, so when we look at Genesis, so Moses is writing Genesis and he's really far removed from the creation. I mean, we're talking like a few thousand years. And so how does he know all this stuff? In my mind, everything is really not being written by Moses, it's being written through Moses, right? By God, by the Holy Spirit. And so in my mind, if I just have like my entire faith in God in all aspects, and not saying that you don't, just because we have a different opinion. My point of view is like, if God wrote it that way, that's what it is. And so why is there a curveball of like some of this stuff that we don't understand? And for me, that's just like another way where God's like, hey, do you trust me? Because maybe one day you'll find out the answer. Maybe one day you won't. But yeah, I do take it literally. Genesis, but there's definitely a lot of things that you got to tackle. There's things that don't make sense to us. So I get where you're coming from. But I think it's great that we can have a different vantage point on it.
It's kind of interesting. Just kind of hearing you guys talk about it is the first question that pops in my head is like, all right, I feel like this is a very common part of the Bible that people kind of talk about, like, oh, is this real? Is this not real? Is it poetry? Is it story? Is it XYZ? And I feel like in the conversation that some people have about even if God is real, they jump to here and they go, well, did that guy really live 900 years and this and that, the other thing? And so I almost like kind of ask myself, like, why do we have to know which way? Not trying to remove ourselves from that question right now. I think it's interesting to talk about. But at the same time, I feel like when I try to justify it, I almost feel like I'm trying to justify it because I'm trying to justify my faith. Like I'm trying to make sure nobody could falsify my faith, kind of a thing. And I could turn around and go, no, this is true, but this was written as poetry, so that doesn't disprove the entire religion. Whereas, for example, Ray, you're kind of looking at it as I do actually have faith in this, and I'm not going to defend my faith. I'm not going to try to prove my faith to you, so to speak. Like I'll spread the good word, but I don't need to prove it to you. I do believe it's real. So it's kind of interesting. I'm like, I wonder if it matters which way that it is. Are there lessons and info to be gleaned from these books that we would miss if we don't take it literally, or that, if we, like I said, that we would miss if we don't take it literally, or is it okay to take it as poetry? Does that hurt the interpretation of the message? Or I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Here, as I'm hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, I wonder if it matters.
Well, so this actually ties into what I just looked up to jog my memory, and this is kind of a question for Ray as well, or just I'd like to hear your thoughts on this part of the play Inherit the Wind. This is not an ad for it. It came out like 75 years ago.
No one's watching Inherit the Wind.
No. There was a film made in the 60s, so if anybody's interested. But long story short, I'm going to kind of spoil it here. But at the end, when the trial comes to a culmination, the defense lawyer asks a Bible expert. He holds a rock and he says, this rock is, according to geologists, 9 million years old or whatever, and then, but the Bible says the earth is not that old. So do you believe this rock is 9 million years old? And the Bible expert says no. And he says, okay, well, if you look at Genesis, one of the very first, I don't know which verse it is, but one of the very first verses says, in the beginning, God separated light from dark. God separated, the waters above from the waters below, right? So he didn't even like create the sun yet, like that, right? He didn't create the earth and the sun yet. He just was separating the dark from light, waters from above, waters from below. And so the question is, can a day, if God created the earth in 7 days, can a day have been longer than 24 hours as we understand a day to be, as humans? And the Bible expert says, I suppose, a day could have been 25 hours instead of 24 hours, right? It could have been slightly longer. And then he says, oh, okay, so if it's 25 hours, could a day have been 26 hours? Could it have been a month? Could a day have been a million years? And so I think it was like this is still the way I think about this, even though I read this play years ago, is that the language used does not like reflect the language as we understand it today. So a day passing during the creation story doesn't have to be a literal day. That's about, at least in my mind, where I think I draw the line in terms of what to take literally and what to not. So I don't.
What is a day to God, right?
Right, exactly. So I would say time interpretation, I guess, would be kind of like the part that maybe is used in a poetic way that doesn't have to be interpreted literally. But, and that would be solved, I think, that would reconcile a lot of differences in a lot of people's, interpretation of the literal creation story versus, the history as science would say the universe and the earth came to be.
I feel like Tally and Ken are just stewing.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, right? And a lot of concepts. But I guess, so I hear James, I hear Ray, kind of on two sides of a coin. But, which is fine, but I kind of don't really care too much. I care more about that book was written by a person for a purpose, right? And so is the question that you guys are answering, what did that person intend to write it mean? Or are you asking, what does it mean to you? Which are two different things, right? So if you're talking about, okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? The person who wrote that had a certain type of understanding in mind and meant to convey a certain type of meaning. And I think figuring out what that is the literal interpretation of what Genesis 1 through 11 are, right? Which could be that he literally meant X or Y or Z, but whatever he did, he literally meant to convey a certain type of point. So, I mean, James brings up a good point when he's saying, like, well, it's probably poetry because in the first 3 days versus the remaining 3 days, like the first 3 days, not even this, or the first day, there's no sun or moon or whatever, but there's still a day. And then Ray makes a good point talking about, well, it was written by a guy who wasn't even there, right? So where is he getting this information from? He's from getting information from God himself. Well, that's all fine and good, but ultimately, the guy writing it also does know what you said, James, right? He wrote it knowing that the sun wasn't created until, the second day, third day? And also that he was saying day on the first day. So I think what's more important is to look at the style of the writing, to look at how it's portrayed, how the narrative of the style of the writing, and say, is this style of the writing trying to communicate the same type of information like my science textbooks would be? Or is it trying to do the same type of information like, for example, the story of Joseph, who got sold into slavery by his brothers, right? Like, is the style of the writing poetic? Is it a textbook? Is it a letter? Is it, there's so many different types of ways to write things and communicate ideas, just like, for example, the beginning of John, the Gospel of John, right? Is very different from the rest of the Gospel of John. In the beginning of the Gospel of John, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Like, that is poetic, right? It's also literally true. But, the way it's trying to convey a certain type of point may not be, I hope someone's not thinking about letters floating in space that was God, right? When he says the word was God and the word was with God. But at the same time, everything he did say is true, right? So I think there's some play there. I think there is a way for you to say that it is 100% true, and it's just conveying that truth in a certain sort of way. I don't know how that jives with you, James, or Ray, or Tally.
What's interesting about that is I first think of because you mentioned I like how you called it is it a textbook, right? That I feel made it very clear to me. I don't know if Genesis is trying to be a textbook. I mean the same way in that Romans isn't trying to be a letter, it just is a letter. You know what I mean? But I think that's a really good point. Is Genesis true? Yes, I believe it is true. And you're okay, where's that line start and stop with true? You know what I mean? Like you said, the word is, there was, the word is, I can't phrase it very well, but I heard somebody talking about the beginning of John 2 recently. And you're right. If you were to take that literally as the word states, okay, what does it mean the word was with God? The sounds, like you said, the letters, what is that thing? It's not described well. So is it untrue? I want to say it's not described well, but if you take it literally in that the word is, how does a word with anything? What does that mean? And I think that's a really interesting point. I think that also goes to okay, so what is the intention, the intended audience and the intention of this book, right? So I think, yes, Genesis is obviously where it all begins. Who's it trying to tell that to? What point is it trying to make? I think, and this is just a reaction, for you guys and for, the listeners and such. I'm not someone who has read through the Bible. A lot of this is going to be a fresh take for me. And so my reaction is that Genesis is kind of telling us, hey, God created all this stuff, and then God led us through this, and here's how we got here, kind of a thing. And it's giving us all that historical text. Actually, I would say not even us. It's almost giving the ancient Jews all of this context of this is the God that you're worshiping. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're saying, that is that kind of an answer to Ken's question where that's who the intended audience is, right? So
I think so.
Right. So it's to the ancient Jews, which I would, it makes sense historically in my brain. So I would agree with that.
Well, and it's to the ancient. I think you guys probably know more than me. I'm curious what you guys think. I think that this book is written to the ancient Jews, and it's trying to tell them, here's this God that you're supposed to worship. He's introducing himself to you. And why is he so great? Well, here's all the things he's done for you and put into motion for you and such. It's he's literally telling you who he is in that moment. And obviously, there's more story to come. But I feel like that's what this book is probably, or seems like it's saying and who it's saying to. I don't know if anybody else has any more historical context to the beginning of the universe, but if you do, please.
Yeah. For me, I've been listening a lot. I think the word day comes from I think the Hebrew word is yom or whatever, yom. And that literally translates to a period of time. So I can't really say it's 24 hours, 25, 26. I don't know, but also I don't remember who said it. Do we need to know how long that was? I don't really think so. I feel like the Bible and explaining of the creation, the whole Bible, I don't think it was made for us to understand the science behind things. I think it was literally made to tell us the who and the why. Who created it? Why did he create it? I think that's the whole purpose of it. I think if we try to delve too deep into the science of it, I think that's literally beyond our scope of understanding. I don't think our brains were created in a way to understand the scope of what is universe, bigger than the universe. I literally, there's a scripture. What is it again? Lean not on your own understanding. We can't understand. I think even if we think about heaven, there's no way we can even picture what it would actually be like. It's beyond our capabilities. So I don't even think it makes sense to dwell on, what is a day? What is an hour? Are they really 900? I don't know, because we don't last to 900 now. So it doesn't affect me kind of.
do you think it matters that some people are held back from being compelled to believe because they're like, that just doesn't make any sense? Why would they say the world was made in 7 days?
Listen, I think people who do that are people who are finding ways to justify their own disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. It's not an intellectually honest kind of dismissal of Christianity. Most people who are like, it's not an intellectually honest thing.
Why not? Before we move on past that, like, why is it not honest? Like, I mean, it sounds like it to me. I'm like, that's a fair question. You know, it says 7 days.
Well, one, okay. So you start off with one. Does God exist?
You're asking me?
Yeah. No. You would. Yeah. That's a question. Does God exist? Because if God does exist, then anything that you think is crazy becomes less crazy, because if God exists, he can do whatever he wants.
That's definitely fair. Yeah, if we're you're right. If God does exist, then the length of the day is trivial to.
It just doesn't matter, right?
Okay,
so,
yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah, so when people are like that, they're like, I mean, they're already coming from a place that God does not exist. So it's not an intellectually honest thing to say, well, Genesis doesn't convince me because this seems miraculous and this goes against my scientific understanding. But we're dealing with, does God exist, yes or no? So it could be very well the case that evolution is 100% true, and Christianity in its traditional form of understanding of a young earth kind of is both true. That they both can be true at the same time, right? If God does exist. Because God can do so many different types of things. So, make things that look old, right? Make things that's not newborn.
Yeah, that's where I was about to go, actually.
So in a sense, I kind of dismiss those type of arguments, but I do think it is important to actually ask the question scientifically, because I think it does have impact. Is evolution true, right? Mm-hmm. Is it wrong to believe in evolution, right? Because that does have a real life impact. Whether or not evolution is true affects how we do science today. And if it affects how we do science today, it's going to affect the technology that we make tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And if we're under the impression that, well, evolution is not true because the Bible kind of shows that it's not true, and we vilify or demonize people who do think it's true, then it's going to affect all of our progress, scientific and technological progress in the future.
Which you could argue, like, is a pursuit of truth, you know what I mean? Like, and a capital T truth, you know, just like, I know science and religion have this, like, dichotomy that I think is just man-made, you know? So, like, it's good to, because some people could say, like, well, who cares if it holds that back? And it's like, well, science isn't separate from religion, it exists within it, you know, it's present. Because, like, Alan, you you kind of alluded to what'd you say? Like, make things to look old. You know, and like that was gonna be my question for Raymond, for example, because let's say the Earth is as old as, I don't know, what was it say, 30,000 years? How many thousand years old is the Earth according to the Bible?
I think it's just under 10.
Okay,
something like that.
So like, if we have physical evidence that we're assuming we're carbon dating correctly, you know, if that's the process that we're using, that shows things that are older, then I look at that as, did God put this thing here to trick us? You know what I mean? Oh, I don't think so. So I guess I look at that as like, and I go, okay, how do we deal with that? Like, and that has, like you said, you know, it has ramifications for what we do now, a pursuit of truth that we do now, where we do interact with the physical to try to move our society forward, you know?
Yeah, and I think... No. Oh, go ahead. Right.
Oh, I totally do think, I agree. I think that was so, like, cool the way that you phrased it, that God can do whatever he wants. But I do totally think that so if you get into like to carbon dating, right, to the radioactive carbon dating, I guess the question is, if you're believing in a young Earth, the question is, are they doing the dating wrong? And I'm not an expert in any of that stuff, but even if these rocks are millions of years old, I think there is a way, you know, as we were saying, that God makes it so that, like, hey, when they test this rock, it's going to seem like that. That's how I'm going to make these atoms decay. But still, this is when I made the Earth X amount of years ago, and you know, that's when I made it, and I'm God, and I can do that.
And that's kind of where I have another problem, right? Because Well, why? Why? When I say why do we want it to be young? Because it seems like it's like, well, maybe God made it and it just looks old, but it actually is young. Like what? What is the?
Who's we?
What is we? What is the people who kind of defend or support the young Earth? The fact that the Earth is only X amount of thousand years old instead of billions of years old, right?
It sounds like just before you move past it, it
Mhm.
sounds like because they're following the word that is written as it is written, like very directly. I don't think it's they want it to be that. I think it's
Well,
that's
what I'm
it
saying
says.
is like they'll defend it because they think that that's what the Bible is saying, and that's what
Mhm.
the Bible is trying to communicate. And I guess my point is I don't think that's what the Bible is saying or what it's trying to communicate. At least not in Genesis 1 where we're getting all this from, right? Because Genesis 1 is not trying to communicate how old the earth is. It's trying to communicate who created everything and for what purpose. Because it's written to people who are wandering in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
They just left Egypt. They don't really have a full written down history of their own people. Right now, they're just writing it down through Moses. And they don't have a full written down history or understanding of this God who just saved them out of Egypt, who apparently is greater than all these other Egyptian gods.
Two things pop into my head as you say that.
Mhm.
One is, so I think I missed it before. So this was written through Moses.
Yeah, Moses was accredited to Moses writing the first 5 books of the Bible.
Because I feel like then it was probably an oral tradition before that. I don't think,
Yes.
I think it's interesting to talk about when like a book was written through somebody, like what was that experience? What was their interaction, with the divine in that moment? But like, I think he was more just, at least for Genesis, writing down the thing that the Jewish people had believed because they were already an established religion. He was like, all right, give me the chisel and hammer and I'll put it in the, they wrote on rocks like in the Flintstones back then, I'm pretty sure. Despite the papyrus. So I think it's interesting to say like, it was already accepted by him, right? Like that was already an accepted story by him, whether he believed it word for word or believed it as poetry or whatever, but that was passed along down. So he was almost receiving it the same way we are, in that he
in
wasn't
a
even
sense,
specifically maybe not the intended audience. But I throw out there too, going back to your other question, how'd you phrase it? You said something like, I just lost it. Oh, like that Genesis is not trying to communicate things like how old the earth is, right? But it says it.
I don't think it does. Again,
you know better than me. It sounds like there's a number that was said.
So I totally love what's being said here. Yeah, so the Bible doesn't say it was made 9,500, 200 years ago. What happens is that there's all of these, Genesis goes through all of these events and it gives a timeline. And, as we were kind of saying, the message, what the purpose and intention of Genesis is just, look who created all this. Look how amazing he is and how wonderful he is, and that he's the one true God we should be worshiping. And then we take all those numbers and we start adding them in our calculators, and we're like, whoa, let's work backwards and see. But that's not what the reason Moses was putting those numbers in there. But that's where the numbers come from.
Sure.
It's us taking them and kind of crunching numbers backwards.
But I guess like if you're going to present numbers, then you are kind of stating just because you stated the numbers in piecemeal doesn't mean you didn't state numbers. So like if we total it, we're just totaling the numbers you gave us. You know what I mean? Like if I was like, I have 5 beans and 4 red beans or whatever, and you were like, that's 9 beans, and I was like, I'm not telling you it's 9 beans. Like I know I'm obviously oversimplifying it, but if the numbers were given, like, and that's what I'm kind of asking is like, then why give those numbers if the numbers aren't, I don't say aren't true, because full transparency, I don't believe in the young earth. I do think it's more poetic, but that's arguing to the point of the written word. I look at it as though, why write those numbers down if you didn't mean those numbers, like I could get behind the whole, well, what is a day, and all that kind of stuff. I totally believe that. Like I think it was just numbers for the sake of talking about the passage of time. But I could see the argument as to like, they gave us those numbers. Why wouldn't we believe that those numbers are true? You know what I mean? Like I could totally see that argument.
I see it as this, right? Adam and Eve, right? When Adam was created, was Adam a baby or an adult?
In my head, it sounds like an adult.
Adam's an adult, right? I mean, we're not questioning all the years backlog. No, he was created and he was an adult.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't 1 year old, but he was a baby. But he was an adult,
yes.
Right? So why didn't God just create rocks that are already fully formed with age built in?
Yeah, that's what we were saying before. But at the same time, again, like the Bible doesn't say if Adam wasn't created as a baby or as an adult. We just assume that. We're making a whole bunch of assumptions when we're reading Genesis to figure out something that it has nothing to try. It's not trying to communicate to you, right? So, I mean, because God could very well have made Adam as a 2-year-old, watched him grow up, and then Adam finally reached his puberty. Then God's like, you know what? We may need to make a woman, right? Maybe that could have been what happened.
Sure, but I guess
what I'm saying is, and then you're talking about like the ages of people. I mean, one, there's a number of things to note about in those time periods how they recorded history. One, they don't necessarily record all the children in the family line.
Mm-hmm.
They just they list notable children in the family line.
Damn. Imagine not getting listed.
He's not even a part of it. It's middle child.
Be like, wait, I was there. Wait, I was there.
So
that's middle child syndrome to a T, man.
I think about this a lot. But sorry, Tyler, I'll let you continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, what I was saying is I think that's why I was jumping back to what I said before. It's not that science isn't cool. I think science is amazing. I think it's very necessary. I think doctors are great. I am saying it to say, what is the purpose of the Bible? I think the purpose of the Bible is literally just to talk about who and why and the framework for Christianity, or so be it, right? I don't think it's a science textbook is what I'm trying to say. So, and there's so many details not in the Bible. Obvious, like you're just going to write down everything that happened in the world before it. There's like no way. So there are going to be so many details that are missing out.
As like Tally, and I think it's I don't know. I do think it's important. Whereas like if our job is to spread the word, right? When people ask those questions, I think those are legitimate questions. And I guess if I kind of go like, I don't know, I want to be able to explain it to those people who are held back. No, but that goes back to it's an intellectually dishonest answer. I guess I just find it, a question. I don't know. It's that one, the whole, I know we're harping on this, but I do think it's just interesting where it's like, and I know what you're saying, Ken, about how I'm like, I know I'm giving very piecemeal stuff right now. This isn't a very coherent thought. I'm coming up with it like in the moment.
Like, finish the thought, please.
I'm like,
but like when they say 7 days, they still stated 7 days. Now we could talk about, yes, that might be a different thing, but when they stated this many years, like it's different from saying, hey, we're assuming and filling in the gaps. How old was Adam? No one says. We can assume. That is a very obvious assumption. Mm-hmm. But when it talks about all these years that passed in all these different ways, those seem like more explicit statements that I think are just interesting that it would put those specific statements that I would argue don't need to be there. And I would probably argue cause more confusion when if they were just left out, you know what I mean? Like if they didn't tell us the creation story in 7 days and then he just explained it in a different way that removed explicit time that we do understand, which I guess goes back to, Tally, you kind of mentioned like what the word day kind of meant back there. But I guess I look at it as like, can they all be explained in that way? Because otherwise, when you include information that seems simple information that I'm just going to take at face value, and then that is very obviously not true as portrayed somewhere else. Like I would say, in archaeology, let's say, we have to now do something with that, right?
So I would like to respond. I'm going to read a short excerpt. This is from the New International Version. No. Sorry. The New International Version of the Bible, Genesis chapter 5. verse 3, when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters, although Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. Then Seth lived 105 years. He became the father of Enosh. After he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 800. So this goes on, right? And this is to show the direct line from Adam to Noah. And this is kind of what I very briefly mentioned earlier on, and kind of what we're talking about now. And I think and this might be something that's much more well understood or more important that I'm not aware of in Judaism. But you go from Adam to Noah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you eventually go from Noah to Abraham. And then Abraham, right, is like the person that God made the original covenant with, and that's like he's considered, like the first person, like the father of
Judaism, right?
So actually, it goes even beyond that. I'm gonna mess up names here, so I'm really sorry. But Abraham and his wife Sarah, right, had God said He'll promise them children, and their descendants will outnumber or whatever number as many as the stars in the sky, and that ended up going on to Isaiah, and then I think eventually Moses, and then Jesus directly. So there's a direct line from Abraham to Jesus, through the mother's line specifically. So that's like a big point in the Bible. I'm skipping way ahead of Genesis here, so I'm very sorry. I'm going all the way to the New Testament.
Unforgiven, but please continue.
Yeah, so no, I'm going back. So anyway, long story short, the bloodline is like super stressed in different parts of the Bible, and the years are given, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about. Same with the creation story, right? The amount of time that's passed is given. And so I think the amount of time is not the important part, as we seem to be talking about a lot of, because that it's very interesting, and that information is given, so it feels like it probably is important, but going back to Ken's point, it's like, okay, so who's the audience for? The audience is for like descendants of Abraham that have just escaped Egypt, right? And so it's like, so if you could trace your ancestry all the way back to Adam and Eve, right? Like that seems like a big deal. That seems like a big unifying factor. That seems like, like you're going all the way back to creation. Like you are the chosen people. And so that's kind of like, at least the way I look at it. But as a quick side note, I'm not sure if that kind of like integrated with what you guys are talking about. So please, I'd love to hear if that's maybe a little bit harsh of a viewpoint on like why the lineage is there, and the timeline, in my interpretation or my understanding of it, the amount of time that passed is not as significant. So I think I agree with Ken, or I think we're on the same page at least. But there's a really awesome author. This might stir a lot of people's pots. I don't know. Yuval Harari. He is Israeli author. He's a historian. He wrote a couple books, but the two ones that are relevant to what we're talking about right now, one is called Sapiens. So it's like an anthropological view of like Homo sapiens, and like the historical anthropological timeline of like from when Homo sapiens were evolved into us currently as we consider Homo sapiens, and 250,000 years ago approximately. Ironically, or I don't know about ironically, anthropologists call the first Homo sapien mitochondrial Eve, because it would have had to been a woman, because it's a mutation in our mitochondrial DNA, not our DNA that's in our, not necessarily our DNA that's in like the nucleus of our cells, and the mDNA in your mitochondria, and so that's passed through the woman's line, the mother's line, and so the first Homo sapien would have been a woman, referred to as mitochondrial Eve. So Sapiens is a great book. His second book, Homo Deus, talks a lot about evolution, and that's a brief history. It's kind of interesting. I'm doing a little bit of hand wavy for you guys on the video, even though
video's not included in the podcast. Nobody sees your hand waving. It's very embarrassing that you just said that. Just so you know.
So Homo Deus, highly recommend, and he outlines the story of why evolution isn't compatible with the creation story. And so up until I had recently read this maybe about a year ago, and my understanding was kind of what I had said earlier with Inherit the Wind. They can be compatible, but the timelines aren't literal, right? And that's kind of still how I think about it. But he lays out the argument for why evolution and the creation story or the young Earth story are not compatible. We can I don't want to get bogged down in those details because I think we're having a much more interesting conversation. Talking about like who is the audience for this, right? The last caveat I want to throw in, and I'm sorry, I can talk all day, is
we won't let you know.
Yeah, Ken's gonna put a hard stop on you. No, okay.
Yeah, you guys are just gonna cut my audio, and I'm not even gonna be in the show. So is the last caveat is some people claim that while it's accepted Moses wrote the entire the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, some historians and people claim that it's probably unlikely because of the different types of ways that it's written in the tone, the voice, the types of writing, and all these things. And I have no idea. I haven't read it nearly critically enough to really even like have a say on that. But I do think it's interesting to think like, how much of it can we really definitively say is from Moses? And like, we can also just believe that. And if it was from the inspired word of God, it's like it's possible that God wanted him to write it different ways, right? So I'm not discrediting that Moses wrote it all.
Do we know where we know that it was, like, when it says it was credited to Moses, it's not like at the end it was like, by Moses. You know what I mean? Like, how do we know that? Does anybody know? I'm curious if anybody knows.
I don't.
Okay. No,
I think parts of the Torah actually say it's a book of Moses, but also at the end of it and the 5th book, Moses is dead. So
yeah, I was gonna mention that.
So it's like Moses dies. So
he hit that rock, man.
He wrote what happened like slightly after he dies. But I mean, what usually happens is all books of the Bible, most of them, they're written by. I mean, like writing then is different from writing now. Most people didn't just write. Most people even know how to write. Writing was more of a special project, and you'd have scribes who'd write with you, for you, and dictate what you say and things like that. It's most likely that the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, including Genesis, was written by by Moses, but like through a project of people who were writing, and you would see that. And then when Moses died, they just finished it up, and they're like, "All right, well, Joshua, now it's your turn." You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just kind of how it is. Even the New Testament, like, you think Paul was literally writing those letters while in jail? No, he wasn't even allowed to write. He had someone, and I forgot the name of one of the guys, just actually writing for him, right?
Could you imagine? Start writing a letter. Speak as fast as you want. That person's like
spreading his heresies, of which he was in jail for, while in jail, and they just let him do it. Like, that's not really what happened.
And this brings me, I'm so sorry.
Oh no, I'm done.
Sorry. And this brings me to my thought piece. I was thinking about this. God is infinite, right? Like, he exists outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the whole purpose, how they said, like, he did the 6 days and on the 7th day he rested. Mm-hmm. God doesn't get tired. He didn't need to rest, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I believe that the time, so yom means a period of time, right? Back then they understood words differently than we do now. Like, if we were to say 14 billion light years to them back then, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Right? So time it's estimations, right? Sure. So now if I'm really thinking about it, I only think God said that to give us a framework, to give us a rhythm that we're supposed to follow. He's not resting because he's tired. He's resting because he wants to show us what he's modeling for us, how we need to live. So days, I don't know, maybe it's weeks for them, but they know that they need to do this, and then rest at a certain point, then do it again. I think that's really what I think it's really a rhythm or really a framework, which is really what I was thinking about. That was my thought piece. I'm done.
And it's important to keep in mind that, like, almost every other type of timekeeping system they would have would be astronomical. Like, they could see, like, oh, there's a sun and moon and stuff like that. But a week is not an astronomical thing. It's purely just a religious thing, right? Mm-hmm. Why break up it into 7 days periods or cycles? There's no moon or star or sun that they're tracking to even do that or create that. So it's bringing in a different type of meaning and intention to it. And then God doubles down on it, saying, like, well, this is a Sabbath and you have to keep it holy, right? So
take the calendar, for example. October is the 8th month, right? but what is it literally for our calendar? It's the 10th month. Was there even November? Was there even December before? No, what are the two ones that were added? July and
I guess
August?
it would be
Julius
July
and Augustus.
August.
Was it the Caesars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were yours even that long before?
And it's a good point too. I mean, just to add on to that, I heard somebody talking about like the 3 days that when Jesus died and through 3 days he was dead. Like some people talk about how a day, some people counted as like evening was a day, and like when the sun was up was a day. Like like they described it slightly different because you could look at it as like he died Friday night and he rose Sunday morning. That's not 3 full days. Like there's nuance even to something that is that explicit in that moment that I think needs to be considered. And like that kind of actually Tal, your thought like kind of inspired this thought. We're in the very beginning. And this episode obviously is literally just a precursor before we even start reading Genesis and the Bible as a whole. And the first thing that we have to contend with is, what do these words mean? Are we taking them at face value? Is something trying to be conveyed to us? Is something trying to be conveyed to somebody else that we're learning through? And we have to think of through their perspective. Who's telling it to us? It went through this person. This one is what actually, what actually happened versus no one was there to see this. So it was directly from God to that person to this, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's just like really important to look at that and go, that is the first thing that we're hitting, and we are going to continuously run into that. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing, right? Like I always talk about something that I really like about Jewish tradition is that they sit down and they talk about, the good book, and they go, that's not what that means. What are you talking about? It means this. And they go, no, because this and that contradicts this. And they go at it in search, that dissonance is in search of, okay, what's actually true? What's the right answer in here? Let's go find it, because it is not always so easy to discern. And I just love how that's literally the most prevalent thing that we're hitting before we even read the first word,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. This actually feels like, I know we haven't answered too many questions. I don't know if we will, but this feels like a really natural place to stop as a precursor to Genesis, unless anybody has anything to add before we do continue in the next episode.
Ooh, I would love to add one thing.
Please.
So I feel like you can't, it's, I love looking at the Old Testament and things like that, but I feel like if you're going to do a podcast talking about Christianity, I feel like you got to at least give like a little love to the New Testament, right? So James was talking about that, apparently that book that everyone knows except for me. It was a book, right? Or was it a play? A book? A play. Oh, sorry.
The Wind of the Wisps or something?
I know, Gone with the Wind.
But a really cool book, a movie if you're not into reading so much. The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And so if you haven't checked that one out, it's a really cool book. And so basically he is he's a journalist and an investigative journalist, and he wants to disprove Christianity. And so he talks to someone who's a Christian, and the person says, if you want to disprove Christianity, you got to go for the resurrection. If there's no resurrection, there's no Christianity. So, as we wrap up, I just want to bring to light that these are awesome conversations. It's really cool that God put all of this in here for us to be able to kind of chew on and talk about as brothers and sisters. But if you're someone who's just tuning in, or for us kind of talking through Genesis a little bit, it's all leading to that wonderful resurrection. Because if there's no resurrection, there's no Christianity.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good thing to keep just present as we talk about all of this. Like that's like the omnipresent thing that we have to kind of keep referring to.
I think of like a roller coaster. Like if we started right there, we'd be starting at the top of the roller coaster. Yeah. But it's so exciting to start in Genesis. And like, I mean, what fun is it to start at the top of the roller coaster? You got to hear the click, 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 click as you go up. So that's where we are. It's a great place to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hear you.
No, the Bible in a Year podcast. Listen to us first. This one's out there. But the Bible in a Year podcast, he specifically would do messianic checkpoints throughout, because he was like, hey, the Torah is a pretty long set of books. We have to keep reminding ourselves where we're going. Like that is the center of things. He was totally on the same thought thought as about keeping that present through the entire journey. He was like, if we go through this in a year, we're not getting to Jesus until November. That's ridiculous. We need to get some Jesus in here. So I like that you said that.
I did have one last thought because I was thinking about just the creation, and I always think about like science and Big Bang, Scooby Doo. Scooby Doo is my comfort word. I don't know where it comes from, but like I wanted to. Well, I'm gonna say debunk. It's not really debunk, but like it's the thought that the world started from like chaos, right? But in Genesis, it does say it was formless and void. And to me, that is not chaos. That I feel like God created something that had a potential. And it was just like he created something from potential and not from chaos. And that's just a thought that was also in my head. So I don't think the bang, here's the earth. Because then who created the bang and who created the stuff that banged? Like there's got to be a creator. There's got to be a creator. Like does it come from nothing?
You know what's funny about that, Tally? And I'm not trying to cut anybody off. Like I know it felt like
you cut me
a
off.
point, but
it's okay.
We could keep. No, I mean like the podcast itself.
No, you are. You ended the podcast like 2 minutes ago.
No, listen.
Yeah, you're like,
we're
done talking.
Let's add. What's it called? But you're totally right. I heard somebody talking about like there are scientists who go, God's not real, religion's not real. It was the Big Bang, and you can't. Okay, so what was before? You're exactly right. What was before that? You know what I mean? Like you just. People often talk about like you have to prove God to be able to believe in him. And I look at that and I go, there's no proof in that. You can't find a beginning without God. You know what I mean? Like, oh, the world, came from nothing. It was this little tiny super dense point and everything exploded and that was the universe. Okay, well then that tiny dense point is God. Like there's no explanation for before, or at least not one that we can fathom right now. You're totally right. Like what initiated things? Because at the very least, whether it be the God we're talking about right now, at the very least, that thing is what we're talking about. That's God. That put everything into motion, And like we didn't even get into like, okay, did he put it into motion via intelligent design? Like did he put it into those are things I'm sure we'll hit. But like I think you're totally right. He's there at the very least. Like I don't know how somebody could possibly explain the beginning of the universe without God.
It just goes back to our understanding of time.
Mm-hmm.
And God lives outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we don't lose the whole purpose or intent behind things, right? Because like there's always how did God do it? How did God do that? But the main point of Genesis is like, well, why, right? And who did it, as opposed to how, right? Because it really for something, the Genesis is not helpful at all in learning how God did anything at all. Like, I mean, even the way, like, if you look at how for example, animals were created, what did the Genesis say? Oh, he just spoke to the earth and the earth made them. And then, so therefore God made them. That's kind of what it says, which is not really helpful in determining how God does anything that he does, but it's extremely helpful if you're a ancient Hebrew who is understanding or trying to understand that there is no other gods. There's only one God who created things out of his own just will. And all these other things and all these things you're making sacrifices to or building golden calves to, they're just nonsense. And there's only one God who made everything in the beginning, and he's done. He's stopped making things. Like he's in his Sabbath rest, right? So everything was created in the beginning by this one thing, by his own will alone. There's no other multiple gods. There's nothing to sacrifice to, any of that. And that's what you believe in, how you believe it.
Yeah, that's the why.
Cool.
Do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
Should we do book or movie recommendations? Something that maybe inspired how we think about this. So mine,
So why not?
I've already made some, so I'm gonna make one more.
You said should we, and you just started.
Yeah.
What was it? Gone with the Wind?
Yeah. So no.
Go watch Gone with
I
the Wind.
always think of Gone with the Wind, but it is Inherit the Wind. That I also recommended Yuval Harari's books. I have no idea what people think of that, if they're familiar. And then the last one is a movie from 2008 called The Man from Earth, which is kind of like a fun play on like a fun thought experiment on if like there was somebody that lived for forever that couldn't die. That's kind of like the premise. Yeah, so it's like an indie. It was like an indie movie that I think is streaming somewhere. So that would be mine. Anybody else have any recommendations or something?
Interesting.
Ray had the Case for Christ, I think I wrote down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lee Strobel. Book or movie for whatever you prefer.
Or throwing this out there, when we finish the Bible, if we pop off, so listen, if you're listening and you want to hear us do the Case for Christ or any of Sapiens and all that kind of stuff, those things will be next. We can keep going.
There's one, it's extremely technical and very boring for people who aren't into it. But if you are, there is The Historical Adam by William Lane Craig. Very, very, very good. And I guess one that's not so technical, I would say, is The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. That's I
is a
think
great book.
Good parallel to creation in Genesis.
What's that one called? The Magician's Nephew?
Yep.
Isn't that the start of the series, the Chronicles of Narnia series?
Yes.
The original started what they never actually did, which upset me.
You know, it's funny. Every time someone mentions C.S. Lewis in one of these discussions, they're always like, everyone else in the call is like, "Oh, you gotta go read that one."
I know.
Book, you know, gotta figure that one out.
No,
Very cool.
Pretty great.
Yeah, this was fun. I was gonna bring up the Anunnaki at some point. I've been watching some conspiracy theory videos, but we'll save that one for another time. James is like,